So welcome to my Get a Life moment for today. I am joined by another very special guest, a good friend of mine and my own personal acupuncturist, Bryony Dowson. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Lisa. It's a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure entirely. So obviously I know a little bit about you and what we're going to talk about today, but everybody out there, you know, in the whole world, because this has been watched all over the world, might not know about you. So who is Bryony? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Really curious question. So who am I? So I think that's a really like an ever-evolving question, and I was sort of thinking really hard about what the answer to that was. And I think I've kind of hit, in a nutshell, I am an acupuncturist and a holistic health and life practitioner. And I think as I've kind of woven along my journey and gone through my journey as both as a person and professionally, I've certainly found that my work resonates with women and works really well in supporting female health. So I think that's probably who I am in a nutshell.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think we're all very diverse beings and we're very fluid beings. That changes all the time, doesn't it? But,
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So I was really interested in sharing with the audience some of the amazing things that you've done on your journey since becoming an acupuncturist. So what's that journey been like actually to get to that point, and what have you been doing since you became an acupuncturist?
So I suppose we'd go back to, I think some of your other guests have touched on it. It's very curious how people find their way in the world and find their way on their journeys. So I suppose that comes back to when I was applying to go to university in the first place. And I started a degree studying biology or biological sciences, and I very quickly sort of realised I couldn't make a difference on the ground. I loved human biology, but I couldn't make a difference on the ground. And so I kind of went through a very turbulent year with lots of sort of its own challenges, and figured out where I was supposed to be going in order to be able to make a difference.
Right.
To humans and health and well-being. And so that landed me a place very conveniently at the University of Lincoln, studying acupuncture, which I studied for 3 years on an amazing course with some amazing other students and tutors. And then very swiftly went into practice, where I met you, because I did some Reiki training with you, and I was still sort of figuring out where I fit on that spectrum of healthcare practitioners. And I just wasn't quite hitting the right points. None of the notes felt right. I wasn't sure. I still couldn't work out who it was or what I was doing and why, and just kind of putting myself into a box of acupuncture still didn't feel right. So I came home one day and, quite unsure. I knew something needed to change, I needed to inject it with some energy, but didn't know how. And so I just very quickly realized that I needed to really push myself out of my comfort zone and do something very, very different, but that was still connected with my acupuncture. So, and that for me, that was about travel and work at the same time. So one day I came home and I Googled how I could travel and work, and what popped up was a volunteering opportunity in Nepal with an amazing charity and organisation called Acupuncture Relief Project. Right. So in March last year, it feels like a lifetime ago, but also just yesterday, I hopped on a plane and went out to Nepal for 2 months. And
just hopped on a plane to Nepal, yeah.
I know, just packed some bags and just went. And I was recently talking to my family about the moment that they dropped me off at the airport, and my legs were like jelly. It was I just hit the entrance to the airport, and I was like, I don't think I could do this. So just hopped on,
yeah, no problem, no hassle.
Absolutely. And then spent 2 amazing months treating hundreds of a rural community in Nepal, so treating hundreds of individuals with such a huge array of health problems, from pain, so the kind of pain and conditions that we see in the UK, through to sort of different challenges. So lots of health challenges that arise when education is less advanced than it is in the UK, and with that comes sort of very different challenges, very different expectations of a practitioner, and that comes down to things like just basic education about what foods they should be eating, what they should be drinking and when, and just how to look after their bodies, and to build a rapport with these communities who are generally less connected to a Western healthcare system than what we have here. So you're almost the intermediary bridge between being a kind of a resident and being a full-on doctor, if you like. Obviously we weren't that, but a lot of our services were primary healthcare.
Right.
And that's the point of call.
So did you mainly use acupuncture, or did you have to prescribe other things apart from obviously talking about diet and basic healthcare that we would really take for granted, I guess?
Absolutely. So a lot of the stuff I think that we have in our own first aid kits at home was stuff that we were using. I think that was what was so lovely, was our primary tool was acupuncture, and it showed the power of acupuncture as a tool to help health and well-being in such a broad way, and in ways that give it the space and the platform to be able to do it. It's fundamental, amazing, fundamental, phenomenal, all of those words. And then alongside that there was option to prescribe herbal things, but yes, there was very close work with some of the trained health practitioners out there to get people prescribed with the right medication, referring them on to receive the right testing. There were is a lovely local phlebotomist, and she works very closely with the organisation, and within the organisation takes blood. So you're really working with the tools that nurses and doctors on first contact with somebody would use, and kind of being that central hub, if you like, that knew where to direct them to in order to get them the best help. And sometimes that was through us, through acupuncture, through herbal medicine, through diet and advice, and it might be transferring them on to a more specialist healthcare provider. But of course, accessing that, getting to that point was really hard for them, and continues to be very hard for them. And so you're almost that bridge between that, which is
so I would imagine it's quite different in Nepal. How did the Nepalese villagers respond to you as a primary healthcare provider in what I imagine to be these tiny little villages, so far from what we understand? What was that like?
Do you know, it's really curious. I think they welcome you with open arms. It's such a lovely place to go. You're welcomed almost instantly. There's almost a stepping back, and they're always quite curious about you. You always, if there's anything you ever did, it was spread like the gossip was spread like wildfire. They'd know everyone in the towns. They call them towns. I mean, they're so small. But yeah, they'd know very quickly what you've been doing, where you've been, what you'd have to do there, all that kind of thing. I suppose a really, really curious question, because when you're in it, it just very quickly becomes a norm. But there's lots of challenges that came with that. First and foremost is the language barrier.
Of course, yeah. So were you working with interpreters?
Yeah, so we were each day you kind of partnered up with a local interpreter who is trained to a certain level to understand your language and the terminology that you use and like help them use. And then obviously, and they tend to be young people that have grown up in these areas. So again, they speak the language. It's lots of their family members and their friends that come into the clinics. So yeah, it was a really challenging opportunity that pushed my skills in terms of communication and building a reputation with that one person in that moment when voice and language wasn't a common theme that we had. So very curious and frustrating, obviously, always there are some very frustrating moments, but equally really rewarding. And certainly I noticed as the time went by, and then when I came back, how much that had shifted how I practiced.
Right. Were they very different? I mean, you said there were some similarities, but lots of very different presenting illnesses and challenges for that community. So what were the biggest differences that you noticed?
So a lot of them, I think, are things that are, whilst common here, are well managed here. So things like blood pressure, things like diabetes, there was a lot of strokes. With our healthcare system here is built to almost monitor and look for those red flag symptoms, and can quickly, and because we're more familiar with those as individuals, we seek help much sooner, and so we can be quite preventative in our medicine, whereas you're almost kind of putting the fire out there.
Right.
Lots of their diets are heavy in salt. Lots of alcohol is drunk. There's sort of not always that education there around that salt can increase your blood pressure and the knock-on effect there. I mean, I dread to think how many conversations I had about water, drinking water. They, for some reason, I mean, they can go days without drinking water, and then they come in and they say, I've got a headache, and you say, how much have you had to drink today? And they're, I haven't drunk anything today. So, but stuff that we just take for granted, you know, stuff that we're taught to do from such a young age, that we should make sure we drink plenty of water in a day and to avoid salt. And so very similar challenges, but different challenges, and more because of as a culture, how we approach them. And we're lucky enough to have a really preventative society here, and a society that where the individuals know what those warning signs are, and versus the community that doesn't, or is less familiar. It's certainly on the rise in terms of understanding, and I think that's part of the work that you were doing out there was, and you could see those individuals who'd been going to the clinic for a long time versus those that hadn't, because they come in and you'd start taking their blood pressure and they'd go, I've drunk plenty of water today, and but then equally you learn so much because they, you know, they have the local knowledge of the plants, and they'd say, no, can I just try a local plant first? Let me just drink some tea.
Really?
Some blood pressure. So stuff that we have lost, I think. And I think that's why I find it so curious, is because it's so different, but almost there's so much we can learn from those communities and their way of life. And so there almost needs to be that, we almost need to find a middle ground again.
That blend, It's interesting you say that obviously you were doing it to push yourself out of your comfort zone, and that it changed the way that you practice when you return. What were the biggest aha moments for you personally in your own personal growth then, as a result of taking that trip?
So I would say there's probably a few key things there. So the first one was I realized how much the practice that we did needs to be, and I speak for not just me as an acupuncturist, but any healthcare, holistic and medical healthcare practitioners, we need to work together more. You know, there's tools all around us that we almost segregate to a certain degree, and actually what I've come back and done is tried to, as much as I can, where I am, is and integrate that as much as I can with other healthcare providers, and looking at things as holistically as possible, and bringing that knowledge in into my work. How else? I think how I related to people on a human level, how I interact with people on a human level really shifted, and being pushed to look for those non-verbal cues with people, that certainly shifted, and I moved away from just listening to that 360 assessment of the room, and that work. And so my relationships built with my clients are very, very different now. I think it gave me a lot more confidence. I think that was just the biggest thing, was I just felt so much more confident knowing the success of what I do, but also my own skill and where I fitted a little bit more. that's changed again in the year or so that I've been back, not least because of COVID-19 as well, and pushing the challenges in that way. But certainly in working out kind of where I fit, and also reminding me that I haven't lost that love for the Western healthcare, Western understanding of the body, which is where I started, which is where I went to university to study. And so I've almost gone on a big cycle and come back to the beginning, but bringing all those experiences back in to create something complete and whole, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And I seem to recall at the time when we were talking about it, you were really grateful for simple things like electricity on all the time, hot water available all the time, real basic stuff that we just take for granted as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's really we've seen that so much during lockdown, if that's what you want to call it, but that's simplifying life, and being grateful for those really simple things like a great dinner, or a TV program, or having half an hour's silence just to read a book in peace, or all of those really simple things, and on top of like those challenges I faced in Nepal, not always having electricity, not always having light, not always having hot water to shower in, or lots of those challenges with going and living in a very basic living scenario in a third world country, which was equally as rewarding as it was challenging. And I think it taps into something very human, instinctively human, a way of living that is is within all of us, and we once lived that way. So, and I realized, and in doing that, I noticed how much my body clock started to regulate again, and some of the cycles that we live as human beings started to settle into a fairly regular rhythm. And then I came back, and the busyness of life comes back, and and it starts to shift again, away from what would be our norm. And that's what's curious, I think, about all of it, is how much we need a simpler life as human beings. We need to show gratitude, and to kind of be really connected and intrinsic to our environments, and those basic things of life: sleep, eating, living off the land, and so how much that brings health in itself.
I mean, it's amazing, really. I mean, to have had that experience and then come back and appreciate everything here, and like you say, come full circle in terms of your own learning and growth. So where does that bring you to now? Obviously, we've been in this period of staying at home.
Absolutely.
So what have you been doing more recently? What sort of things have you been occupying your time with?
I think going back to a bit of a simpler life, I definitely have been reading a lot more, kind of coming back to those things that fill me up in a different way. Reading, spending time with my immediate family in the house. I did a huge revamp of my website, so that's been keeping me busy. I've started to do some training on coaching, which is really exciting, and integrating that within kind of a lateral arm of my work, if you like. I think Rosanna touched on it, which was really interesting, about being an individual who needs lots of different things.
Yes.
And when I watched your other Get Alive moment video this week, was it last week or last week?
Last week,
last week with Rosanna, and she was talking about needing lots of different things to fill your cup up and make you feel complete. And I realized that was one of the other things on this journey of discovery as a practitioner, is that I kind of need lots of different things, lots of different challenges. And so kind of drawing that in, so coaching has been one of them, and developing that as another kind of leg of my work. And then as you have joined with us, with me and my mum, and we do it together, is Sister Stories, a online women's circle. It was physical before we went into lockdown, but it has now shifted to online.
So Sister Stories, tell me a little bit about that then. So I know that you've been doing that with your mum Penny, and where did that all come from? How did that come about, and what's its purpose?
So this was actually a conversation not long after I got back from Nepal. I think that time away really did shift my perspective and caused me to start asking the right questions about how I wanted to go forward. And one of them was about how can I diversify and amplify making a difference? How can I do that without being dependent on one-to-one in 1 hour? And I talked to mum and my mum at Penny Lee, and she had also said that she'd been sort of thinking about other things that she could do to make a difference within her community. And the two it was just in a moment, the two almost collided. And I talked about how I loved in Nepal, how you live within the community. We live very much in the UK and in a lot of kind of Western cultures in little bubbles, in tiny bubbles in a big bubble, if you like. And I think that isn't always conducive with true wellness, because I think we were meant to really live in harmony with everyone else and with our environments. So I sort of wanted to pull that back and encourage that here. And I'd spoken to her, and we kind of pulled our minds together, and we thought, you know what, I think there needs to be some kind of circle practice. And work that mum had done before. She'd come across a lady who started Sister Stories down in London, and somebody else who supported that development of that project, that program, if you like. So Sister Stories was founded by a lovely lady called Gemma Brady down in London, I think about 2 or 3 years ago now. And the premise was that it was essentially an opening up of your living room, or a safe space to women in the community to just come together and sit. And I think coming back to what is natural for us as human beings, and that would have been sitting around a fire and sharing in whatever form that was. And so that was the premise. It was as simple as there would be a centerpiece, usually some candles to represent fire, and you'd sit in circle and you would share. And that might be sharing of your presence, sharing of your heart and your mind, and being a witness to whatever it is that person needed to say, whether that was giving voice to whatever you needed to, and that space be safe and sacred and confidential, and a space without judgment or without counsel. And that's, I think, something that we really miss out on. And I think something that I picked up from being in practice, where some of the biggest things that people get from my work, and I'd imagine you see this, Lisa, with your practice, where people often just want to be heard. They just want to tell their story, our story, just speak whatever they need to in terms of who they are, or something that bothers them, or something that they want to share that's joyous, whatever it is, but they just want to be heard. And I don't think we always have time for that in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, whether it's in my therapy practice or in our leadership retreats, one of the things that I strongly believe, and this is my belief, that as human beings, at a really basic level, we want to be seen, heard and loved. Absolutely. We want to be seen, heard and appreciated. So seen, witnessed, heard, and be able to use our voice in whatever way to be heard. And to be appreciated as another human being, to be loved.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think appreciation, value, I think that knowing that you have a space somewhere, and even if that's a temporary space with even people that you don't know, and often that is the case, is it's a circle space where lots of people who don't know each other come together, and even if it's only momentary, obviously friendships do bloom through this, but sometimes it is momentary, and that momentary connection with a group of women who you might never see again, is just something to be held so close to your heart. It's so beautiful and so precious. And I mean, I talk for myself in this, but what I get from it is it fills my cup. It makes me feel well and happy, and all of those things about having a purpose, being valued, being heard, being listened to, but also being able to offer that. We talk about acts of kindness. That is, I think, one of the most fundamental acts of kindness you can give is somebody you offer someone your whole self to them, to listen, to hear, and to just hold you in that space, and that really, really safe space, which I think sometimes we don't always find that we have. And I think as practitioners, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel so blessed that I have a safe space that I can provide in the form of sister stories, but also in my therapy space as well. And how many people I realise don't have that safe space that they can go to.
I guess that, you know, historically, if we go back, centuries, certainly in tribal communities, women would gather together in what they called the red tent. So at their time of menstruation or in their confinement, having had a baby, and the elder women in the group would gather together, generally in a hut or a tent or a yurt or some circuit or around a campfire, and they would share their wisdom, their knowledge. Absolutely. They would, the stories would be shared, because that was before we documented things, and that's how things were passed on through generations.
Absolutely.
And in our modern society, certainly in the UK, we don't necessarily live in close proximity to our relatives, to, you know, our mothers, grandmothers, caregivers, nurturers. And so we can feel quite alone, you know. The age of us being out there, driving our careers, moving from one end of the country to another, often means that we are at a distance from those closest to us. I suppose this is the perfect antidote, if you like, to that. I think it's interesting that it is sister story and it's for women.
Yeah,
I've started to see an emergence of similar things, especially online, for men, because I think it's equally important that they have that safe space as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I totally agree. I think it's a really tricky navigation, and one of the things that I questioned at the start was, why does it have to be women? But I think part of that safe space is, and you touched on it there with the red tent thing, is that we naturally would have found safety with our mothers, with our sisters, with our daughters, and that's not to say that we weren't safe if you swap that round, but I think there's a connectedness and a mutual, something that fundamentally mutual about being a woman or being a man. And I absolutely think that it's so important for there to be spaces for men as well. And if you could offer that, I think almost wouldn't be a space for me to do that. Whilst I do it on a small level in my practice, you almost need that to be a safe space for men as well. And actually, I think there almost feels like a greater importance for that, and greater importance for safe spaces for men at the moment, because I think as women we do speak about it comfortably, about needing support and needing, often our mothers, like you say, often our mothers embody that safe space, and I think, you know, fathers are that for men. But so I think it's an all-round, it's a human thing. We fundamentally as humans, we need connection, but it just happened to be where I fell was in that sister stories circle and that women circle.
And we might just add that that's how you identify as well. How you identify, or you may identify as non-binary, and I think there needs to be a safe space for all humans to have that connection. But obviously just here we're talking about sister stories, but we are connective species. We need that connection, don't we? We need that connection. So it's amazing that yourself and your mum, especially, you know, the mother-daughter relationship, choosing to do that together as well is so powerful.
Absolutely.
So powerful. So what's next then for you, Bryony? You know, as we start to emerge out into this so-called new world, what's next for you?
Do you know what? I don't really know. I'm still figuring that out, actually. I think practice is always going to be a part of who I am. Sister stories, all of these kind of branches will always be part of who I am, but what that looks like, I still don't really know. I don't know if that is a helpful answer to the question, but I'm really kind
I
of
think it's
trying
an
to...
honest answer. I think so many people, we're kind of navigating a road we have never been down before, and things aren't the same as they were. And in some ways, thank goodness that we're
Absolutely. I
embracing
think it's
new.
shaking things up. I read something the other day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I read something the other day that said 2020 is not cancelled. It's one of the greatest years for change.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I think that kind of summed that up beautifully. And so it is a time of uncertainty and fear and worry and challenge and, you know, all of those things. But I know, as I speaking for me personally, I'm trying to lean into that as much as possible and allowing what is supposed to just happen and be, but, you know, staying true to what my values are and being there for the people that need me to be there in the way that I can offer that.
Yeah, and just trusting. And to quote my previous guest, hope is on its way. Hope is on its way.
I love that.
So as we wrap up today, it's been an absolute delight spending time with you. What one tip, what one get a life moment tip for a great life, a good life would you give to the viewers, the audience?
I think mine is stay inquisitive, stay curious, always ask questions, keep learning, keep listening to all of those stories out there. Share your own, because you never know who that's going to help. But I think just always sort of stepping back with but also stepping forward with curiosity, being open to hearing, but stepping forward and just playing, having fun. I think, was it Tiffany's was step into the adventure, a call for adventure.
Yeah, fantastic. So always have that beginner's mind, that learner's heart. Fantastic. It's been my absolute pleasure speaking to you today, Bryony. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.